It is Monday, April 9th, 2018, and this is the Monday Morning Analyst. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. I am the host of this program. Thank you so much for joining me. I greatly appreciate it. Very brief disclaimer. There is some construction going on at my home. You might hear some noises. I will try to minimize them. I apologize for any inconvenience with the audio or the presentation as a consequence of that. Hopefully, it's not too bad. Now, on to today's program. What are we going to discuss? Well, last week was a bit of a disaster, but I'm trying to think about what people are discussing most coming out of UFC 223. My sense is, how do we grade the performance of Khabib Nurmagomedov? He wins the decision. He becomes the lightweight champion. In fact, he didn't lose a round. I don't know if he's lost a round yet in the UFC, although maybe in some cases he should have if you look at the Gleason Tebow fight. But nevertheless, certainly has had a dominant run, but there are some questions that remain. Whether they are fair or not, they do exist. So here's my thought about this. Let's look at a little bit of the tape, not a whole lot. Let's look at some of the stats, and let's see if we can put the two together to establish a better context in which we can grade Khabib Nurmagomedov's performance in his win over Iaquinta at UFC 223. Let's do that now. All right, so I put a poll up on Twitter, and these polls are always unscientific, but I'm at least trying to get a sense of where the fan base might be in terms of their thinking coming out of an event or about a particular issue. And on this one, I asked them, how would you grade Nurmagomedov's performance? Would you grade it excellent, very good, or somewhere around fair or poor? And what you see is that the majority of the responses are somewhere around good or very good. Now, this is entirely subjective. What does good mean? What's the difference between good and very good? We're only speaking to people's intuitions. Where do you sort of naturally come down on this? Personally, I would rate it as not necessarily excellent, but very good. I think grading it just good would actually be a bit of a disservice, but that's my own interpretation. Your mileage may vary. I just wanted to sort of create a baseline for where I think the fan base is, and good to very good probably is okay, but I think it's the better bracket is probably very good to excellent, depending on how you want to look at things. Now, one of the points I made on Saturday night on my post-fight special was that, look, whenever a fighter comes into an event like this, particularly if it's a change in the last minute, you often get a bit of a wonky performance. And here's what I mean by that. You get a main event context where one fighter is expecting one opponent. They get a switch at the last minute, and they just don't look like themselves. That's often true for the person who's in the ostensibly superior position. Yes, TJ Dillashaw did defeat Joe Soto, but you could look at that Joe Soto performance and say that's one of his better, if not best ones, even though he lost ultimately against TJ Dillashaw. You go to John Jones versus Ovince St. Preux. He was not expecting that at the last minute, and in the end, he did win all 5 rounds, but he didn't exactly look like himself in that context. And then, of course, came out later on, UFC 214, and looked very good. There is some controversy about that, but that's for another time. Here we have Khabib Nurmagomedov was expecting Tony Ferguson, then thought he was going to get Max Holloway, and ended up all the way down to Iaquinta. We know the story there. I won't repeat it, but I'm just sort of saying Nurmagomedov looked pretty good. I wouldn't call it his ultimate best, not as dominant as he looked against Edson Barboza, but there is something to be said for, we know that in situations like this, where someone's getting a last-minute switch, and I realize Iaquinta got a last-minute switch, I realize OSP, and I realize Joe Soto also did, and so for them to sort of perform up a level also speaks to their character as well as the sort of funkiness of the situation, but it's just not historically unusual for somebody who, let's call him in the championship position, to react this way. You have to remember, fighting is all about peaking. Yes, Nurmagomedov has this sort of linear, very predictable style in a way where you kind of know what he's going to do. Maybe not the exact sequence, but there's a general strategic, inevitability to it all that's easy to anticipate. And so you can sort of prepare no matter who you are for him in that sense. But the other way around is he's looking for individual things, individual setups. You have to abandon all of them when it comes time for an opponent switch. So they may not just look like themselves. And even with that, he still won with 50-44 and then 50-43 scorecards. That is still a fair degree of dominance. Now, something else you want to keep in mind here is we're going to look at some of the statistics in just a minute. They, of course, are not the final arbiter of anything. They help paint the picture, but they don't complete it. They don't start it. They're just sort of part of it. But one thing you can often find is that sometimes you can see an impressive performance and it will statistically match, right? I don't know, pick something. LeBron James scores 60 points in a game, and then you can show the highlights, and wow, like you are as dazzled by the incredible numbers as you are by what you physically saw. This is actually a case where there's a bit of a divergence, where the statistics, in my view, very much back up the notion that this was either a very good or an excellent performance by Nurmagomedov, but they don't exactly pass the eye test. Now, of course, in those first, second, and fifth rounds, when he got the takedown and he was just being Khabib, that was pretty much vintage. But he had that third and fourth round where he either partly chose to stand or didn't put a ton of effort into the takedown or couldn't take him down, depending on your perspective. And I'm just pointing out, you need to keep in mind there are some greater contexts here. Namely, there sometimes can be an alignment between what the stats show and what your eyes see, and sometimes there can be a bit of a divergence where somebody could be in some ways worse than you thought or better than you thought, and what you saw and what you remember don't exactly align with that one-to-one. Always keep that in mind. Now, I want to take a look at some of these statistics. Again, the statistics aren't the beginning of the conversation. They're not the end of the conversation. They are not the conversation. They're just a part of the conversation. But I think they help illuminate some things here. If you look at the record of achievement that Nurmagomedov has, was 25-0 coming into this contest, now 26-0. That should tell you that whatever his stats were up to this point are probably reasonably indicative of a baseline level of performance, right? If he has X percent amount of takedowns attempted per fight, you should see something like that over time. If he has a certain success rate over time, he should more or less match that. So what do we know about his baseline statistics? This is what Fight Metric has to say. His takedown average, he lands about 5.44 or a little under 2. This is per 15 minutes, so a little under 2 a round. His takedown accuracy, this is how often he is good at taking somebody down. It's only 44%. It's really not that great. He doesn't have this like lights out every time he touches you takedown success rate. In fact, in the Edson Barboza fight, he only scored 4 of 13. So the majority of those were stopped. It's just that once he gets you down for the most part, he just mauls you from there. His takedown defense, obviously pretty good at 84%. Submission averages, doesn't attempt a whole lot. His striking defense, 70%. Here's something Nurmagomedov doesn't get a lot of credit for. People want to spotlight individual times he's been tagged. But if we want to play that game with just about any fighter, we could. Nurmagomedov is good about not getting hit. The tape's going to show that here in just a minute. Strikes absorbed per minute, about 2, which is a little on the high end. Striking accuracy, about half. And then strikes landed per minute, about 4, a little over 4. Now, some of that won't be all that relevant, but this is the baseline level of performance. Now, these stats, I believe, factor in the last fight, so it's a little bit unclear, but they didn't change dramatically from the Edson Barboza fight. They were more or less around that. So then, that would take us to, well, what were the stats in this particular fight? Let's look at them. So number one, what do you notice right away? I'm going to start sort of from the right side of the screen and move backwards. He attempted and landed 6 of 15 takedowns, which means a total of 40%. His average is about 44%, so it's slightly below average, but nothing too bad. It wasn't like all of his takedowns were stuffed in some kind of statistically demonstrable way. A little below average, but not much. In terms of his striking accuracy, you see here 48% is his baseline, and in this particular contest scored about 44%. Again, ever so slightly below average, but pretty much right at where we normally consider him to be. And remember, when I'm using the word average, I'm not using the word average in a general sense. I'm talking about what is the baseline for Khabib Nurmagomedov's performances. What are the metrics that we see when he competes? So he's basically, for the most part, ever so slightly just under his normal baseline for competitive success. You look at a breakdown of these significant strikes, and what you see is that, yes, he's a bit of a headhunter. There is some way to look at his tape and say, his striking seems limited. Rudimentary, I don't know, but certainly limited, right? He doesn't have a wide arsenal. He did throw kicks, but they're not very good. He doesn't really use kicks to set things up. He's really much, a boxer more than he is any kind of a kickboxer, and he was using the jab, pumping it constantly. So the stats kind of speak to that. And you can see in those third and fourth rounds, those are the rounds where he couldn't get takedowns. I think he only attempted 1 in the third and then 2 in the fourth. And in any case, it didn't really matter. He completely outstruck Iaquinta by any measurement. He was busier, almost 3 times as busy in terms of overall volume, and in terms of what landed, just did a significantly more impactful job. right? So we look at the stats for a baseline, we have an understanding. We look at the numbers in this fight, they match that pretty closely. You then look at the individual round-by-round performance, and what it tells you is, look, there are some ways to assess that how limited it could be or how one note, right? He does go to the head, perhaps a little bit more than is advised. We're not going to say he has, this amazing striking ability a la Anderson Silva in his prime, but the numbers pretty clearly show that he did a great job throughout this. Now, what you might want to say is he kind of faded a little bit over the stretch, because in the third round he had 37, he landed. In the fourth round he had 35, and in the fifth he had 30. But in that fifth round, he got back to taking him down and mauling him there. So I don't know if that's really a very accurate way of looking at it. In other words, when you look at the stats, what do they tell you? They tell you that this was more or less a pretty classic Khabib Nurmagomedov performance. Maybe he could have gotten a couple more takedowns, maybe. Only needed maybe one more to change what the stats would have shown us. Maybe he could have landed a little bit more or something. But the notion that this is some kind of highly aberrant, exposing performance, the numbers just don't show that. They really don't. Now, as again, I said before, I'll say it again, we're not saying that the numbers are the final arbiter, but we are asking, to the extent that the numbers are in some ways helpful in understanding this performance or any performance, the numbers do not show that this was categorically terrible for him. They just don't show that. So what does the tape show? Well, first, second, and fifth round are the ones where he gets takedowns and he mauls him. But the third and fourth rounds are the ones where he has to exchange. And in the third round, he landed, but in the fourth round, it was the round that, Iaquinta landed the most without getting taken down. So I wanted to say, let's look at all the times Iaquinta either landed something or partially landed something or threw something of any kind of consequence. So I put together a highlight reel to see what we could learn from that. Let's take a look at that now. Okay, here you have a highlight reel. This is, again, the fourth round. I picked the fourth round not because I felt it was unusual in some capacity. I thought this is the round you could look at and say, Iaquinta did really well here. And what are you going to notice here? Well, a couple of things. Some of the punches that Iaquinta lands, they're great. You can see a couple times he tries to counter Khabib Nurmagomedov coming in. A couple times he tries to slide out of the pocket, throw a hook, and catch him. But what you also see is that's fairly rare. Most of the time when he gets hit, Nurmagomedov, yes, his chin is in the air, and yes, again, his footwork is not all that advanced. This is a very, rudimentary feels a little bit disparaging, but it's a very limited striking game that he has. But it seems like Nurmagomedov is keenly aware of that. And the reason why I say it is because sometimes he does get caught, right? You see him throwing in the pocket, Al waiting, and then Al countering after the fact, usually off the two. But you also notice that he manages distance pretty well. You also know a lot of those punches, they brush off the forearm, or they brush off the shoulder, or he rolls with them. Musin Corbre made this point to me many years ago. And if you watch MMA at all, you know what to be true, or boxing. You might get hit with a punch, but if you can see the punch and you can kind of roll with it, it'll hit you, but it's really not all that impactful. You just move with the punch, let it sink into you, try to block it to the extent that you can, and you'll basically be all right. That might land on you. It's not a good thing. The judges might count it a little bit, but you're still very, very much in the fight. Look at this highlight reel. At what point do you see Nurmagomedov in any trouble whatsoever? And by the way, think about what we're looking at here. We're not even looking at all the stuff that Nurmagomedov did on the offensive side. This is very much unfair to Nurmagomedov in a very clear way. We're looking at all the times Al was trying something. But this is my point. This is a round where Al struck the best without being taken down. Now, that's a credit to him for not being taken down, but this is his chance to put this fight in the best terms he could, and this is where he had the highest output as a consequence. And even in this round, what you notice is Al is a very good fighter, a very competent fighter, a very game fighter. He has my highest respect. But the tape shows what it shows. Nurmagomedov got out of the way of a lot of these. He blocked a lot of these. He rolled with a lot of these. And he got caught by a few of them. But it's nothing scandalous. There's no scandal here. If you want to look at this tape and you say, well, Maybe Al didn't really stick it to him the hardest ever, but he does land on him clean. I would agree. Or that when you look at this, you can say, well, there's some problems here. Maybe Al couldn't finish the job. Maybe somebody like a McGregor or a Tony Ferguson could. And I'm not inclined to disagree. I think those are pretty fair assessments, right? Tony Ferguson has a long reach and can put combinations together and takes risks, and he might find that chin. And by the way, Tony Ferguson known as a very hard puncher. I'm not inclined to disagree all that much. Same for Conor McGregor. Very, very, very long, crafty striker. He absolutely might be able to take advantage of the situation in ways that Al Iaquinta was not. But this is the other component. Al wasn't striking up to his full potential either because of that takedown threat. Another reason, another context here that you have to take this fight seriously in terms of the way in which it played out was Al was lowering his stance. He was trying to minimize his exposure. He was trying to find his openings because he knew if he wasn't careful about that, he was going to get some frequent flyer miles. And he didn't want that. So another reason to look at Nurmagomedov's striking beyond the statistics, beyond what this tape shows here, and to take it seriously, is that he doesn't necessarily need to be able to strike like a prime Anderson Silva, because what he is able to do is, early on in a fight, establish wrestling dominance and a serious threat about what happens to you if you don't take that seriously or you don't stop it. And then if for some reason later on in the fight he can't reestablish that, he can at least keep that presence there to mute somebody who is a significantly better striker. Now, somebody like Tony Ferguson, maybe that wouldn't work because he's a risk taker, and to an extent, so is Conor McGregor, as well as being crafty. But I'm just pointing out here, if you look at this and your takeaway is, well, Khabib has terrible striking, I don't really feel like that's the right takeaway. I really don't. Again, does he have amazing striking? No. Does he have competent striking? I think the answer is yes. It's very much yes. It's like Yoel Romero. He's not a two-way striker. He just waits, blocks, parries, the whole bit, and then puts it on you. Nurmagomedov's not exactly that way, but he is really good about understanding he's the opposite of Tony in terms of taking risk. How do I minimize my risk? I'm going to minimize my risk by, number one, having a good sense of distance. I'm going to minimize my risk by rolling with punches. I'm going to minimize my risk by, I'm going to simplify my striking arsenal, which is going to make it less impactful, but it's also going to minimize my risk. And early on in the fight, I'm going to establish a significant takedown and top control threat to the point where even if you are on your feet, you're just not going to be the same kind of guy. What does the tape show? Al Iaquinta acquitted himself, given the circumstances, very strongly. But it also shows that Nurmagomedov's striking defense, very much underrated. Nurmagomedov's distance management, very much underappreciated. Nurmagomedov's ability to roll with shots, underappreciated. His stand-up, very limited, but his stand-up, very effective. One last piece of statistics for you that my buddy Jed Meshew, also from MMA Fighting, dug up. Here's what he writes. Khabib connected on 70 punches over 10 minutes standing, while getting hit 22 times. That's 7 strikes landed a minute while absorbing 2, all while standing. Just some numbers for you. Well, let's go back to what the baseline statistics showed one more time. What do they say? They say, historically, his career statistics, Nurmagomedov lands per minute about 4.34. In this particular case, it was up to 7. It would also show statistically that his striking defense at 70%, probably much still intact, but of course, strikes absorbed per minute, 1.55. Historically, in this one, 2. So he absorbed slightly higher amount of strikes, given his overall baseline level of performance, yet struck much higher in terms of strikes landed per minute. So again, when you look at the total statistical picture here, maybe it doesn't necessarily wow you in terms of the tape, but the numbers show slightly below his normal baseline of performance for some things, and then in certain ways, well above, creating an overall picture of a pretty standard Nurmagomedov performance. My final thought on this, look, I'm going to say it one more time. If you believe that Tony Ferguson can beat Khabib Nurmagomedov, there's a very good reason to believe that. You can make a strong argument for it. If you believe that Conor McGregor can beat Khabib Nurmagomedov, that's okay. There's a strong argument for that. Conversely, if you think Khabib can beat them, there's also a strong argument for that. This is what makes the sport great. There's lots of reasons to believe in very, very elite, capable fighters. And I understand that we were waiting for this buzzsaw performance from Nurmagomedov, and he may be suffering as a consequence of people just thinking he was going to go in there and just handle Iaquinta. Nobody goes in there today and just handles Iaquinta. It's very, 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 very difficult to do. But what we can say is, in rating his performance, are there substantive reasons to think that other fighters might be able to take advantage of some perceived weaknesses? Yes. Was this fight on Saturday, was this fight somehow aberrant from a normal level of success that Khabib Nurmagomedov typically showcases? Not really. Pretty much all in line here or there. I rate his performance on Saturday very, very good. Last but not least, two big MMA events coming your way. The first of which I believe will be on April 13th. Yes, this will be at the Family Arena in St. Charles, Missouri. Bellator 197 Chandler versus Gertz. Your main event, Michael Chandler fighting Brandon Gertz. Your co-main, AJ McKee versus Justin Lawrence. Baby Slice is back at 160-pound catchweight versus Devin Brock. And then keep an eye on this guy. Logan Storley is going to be taking on Joaquin Buckley. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Then on Saturday, UFC on Fox 29. This will be at the Gila River Arena in Glendale, Arizona. Great card. Knock on wood, it stays in place. Dustin Poirier takes on Justin Gaethje. Can't wait. Carlos Condit versus Alex Oliveira. Marvin Vettori versus Israel Adesanya. What a sleeper fight that is. Michelle Watterson versus Courtney Casey. Tim Boetsch versus Antonio Carlos Jr. on your prelim card. Muslim Salikov against Ricky Rainey. Wilson Hayes versus John Moraga. And then Christoph Jocko taking on Brad Tavares. You move to Fight Pass. Gilbert Burns taking on Dan Moray. Shayna Dobson versus Lauren Muller. Diego Lima taking on Yushin Okami. Arjun Buller is back against Adam Wieczorek. Matthew Lopez versus Alejandro Perez. And then Luke Sanders taking on Patrick Williams. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? What did you like? What did you hate? Shoot me an email. LukeThomasNews@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And until next time, enjoy the fights.